I am Cassidy, 33 years old, and I just systematically dismantled my family's entire financial existence using nothing but data. It all started on what should have been the proudest day of my life. I stood entirely alone on the massive, sprawling green lawn of my university campus, sweltering in a heavy black graduation velvet gown, staring blankly at three empty white folding chairs in the fourth row. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from my mother, Diane. The message read, "We are not coming. A degree at 33 is pointless. Stop embarrassing the family. Go home and stop playing pretend." I did not shed a single tear. I simply dropped the expensive celebratory bouquet of roses I had bought for myself into the nearest trash can and turned away. What my mother did not know was that her text message would soon become the most expensive mistake of her life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who constantly underestimated your worth. Trust me, you are going to want to hear exactly how I used my pointless degree to take everything from them. Around me, the campus was alive with joyous noise. Proud parents were snapping photographs of their children adjusting graduation caps and crying tears of pure joy. Fathers were pulling their daughters into tight embraces, and mothers were handing over beautifully wrapped gifts. I stood like a ghost among the celebrations, clutching my hard-earned diploma in biomedical data science. The gold foil seal caught the afternoon sunlight, a stark reminder of the grueling late nights, the endless research, and the sheer willpower it took to get here without a single dime of support from my family. I had literally spent the last 5 years surviving on instant noodles and cheap coffee, taking out predatory student loans just to keep the lights on in my cramped apartment. I had invited my mother, my sister Brittany, and my brother-in-law Kendrick, hoping that for just one afternoon they could put aside their relentless judgment and celebrate an actual milestone. I had even reserved premium seats for them right near the podium. Instead, those three empty chairs mocked me glaringly obvious amid the sea of packed rows. I read the text message from my mother one more time. "Stop embarrassing the family." The audacity of her words settled into my chest, but instead of the familiar sting of rejection, I felt an icy wave of absolute clarity. For years, I had allowed Diane to dictate my worth. She lived in a sprawling Connecticut mansion, completely obsessed with projecting an image of old money wealth and suburban perfection. To her, a daughter pursuing a doctorate in her 30s was an absolute failure, a stain on her flawless country club reputation. She preferred my sister Brittany, who ran a flashy organic cosmetics brand and married into what appeared to be a wealthy Atlanta finance family. They were the golden children, the success stories she bragged about at charity galas. I was always just the quiet, stubbornly independent disappointment who refused to conform and get a normal, respectable corporate job. I locked my phone screen and took a deep breath of the warm summer air. The heavy, emotional weight of seeking my mother's approval evaporated right there on the graduation lawn. I realized I did not need her applause, and I certainly did not need her toxic presence in my life. I walked away from the ceremony as the crowd cheered for the valedictorian. I tossed the velvet doctoral hood over my arm and headed straight for the parking lot, completely ignoring the sympathetic glances from a few professors who had noticed my isolation. I climbed into my beat-up 15-year-old Honda Civic, a car my mother frequently called an eyesore, and started the ignition. The tired old engine sputtered loudly for a moment before finally catching a harsh contrast to the luxury sedans filling the university lot. As I gripped the worn steering wheel, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Let them think I am a failure. Let them laugh at my age and my cheap car. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the empty chairs and the fake family obligations behind me. I knew something they did not. I knew the exact value of the algorithm I had spent the last 3 years building in the dark. I was driving home completely alone, but my life was about to change in ways my mother could not even begin to comprehend. The drive back to my tiny apartment was a blur of memories I usually tried to suppress. Seeing those parents on the lawn fixing ties and wiping away tears of pride, had unlocked a vault of resentment. It was not just about the graduation. It was about an entire lifetime of being the designated afterthought. Growing up, the dynamic in our house was not just unfair, it was structurally engineered to keep me at the bottom. My mother, Diane, operated on a twisted system of conditional love where worth was measured entirely by how well you matched her aesthetic. My sister Brittany was her masterpiece. I remember the summer I turned 20. I was working two brutal jobs, waitressing mornings at a greasy diner and stocking shelves at a grocery store until midnight, just to cover the crippling interest on my student loans. I would come home smelling of stale coffee and cardboard, exhausted down to my bones. One humid August afternoon, I dragged myself into the driveway to find a massive, ridiculous red bow plastered across the hood of a brand new Porsche Macan. Brittany was squealing, jumping up and down while Diane filmed the whole thing on her phone for social media. "Look at my baby girl," Diane had cooed, panning the camera to catch Brittany hugging the leather steering wheel. "You deserve this, sweetheart. 21 is a milestone." I stood there in my stained work uniform, staring at a car that cost more than my entire undergraduate tuition. When I quietly asked my mother later that evening if she could perhaps help me cover just one semester of textbooks, her face hardened instantly. She looked at me like I had asked her to commit a crime. "Cassidy, we are not a bank," she said, sipping her chilled Chardonnay. "Brittany needs a reliable vehicle for her image. She is building a brand. You chose to study something entirely unmarketable. You need to learn the value of hard work." The value of hard work. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. While Brittany was handed a luxury vehicle to build a brand that consisted mostly of posting heavily filtered selfies, I was literally building the foundation of a biomedical algorithm that would eventually map genetic sequences faster than any current technology on the market. But to Diane, data science was not glamorous. It did not look good at country club luncheons. It was pointless. Every holiday, every family gathering was a masterclass in marginalization. If I achieved something, it was minimized or ignored. When I got accepted into the PhD program with a partial scholarship, Diane announced it at Thanksgiving dinner by saying, "Well, Cassidy is staying in school. I suppose it delays having to face the real world." Then she immediately pivoted the conversation to Brittany's new boyfriend, Kendrick, a man who spoke entirely in finance buzzwords and wore suits that looked too expensive for his actual salary. Kendrick was the perfect addition to their toxic ecosystem. He was arrogant, deeply insecure, and completely reliant on the illusion of wealth. He and Brittany fed off each other's narcissism, while Diane bankrolled their lifestyle under the guise of investing in their future. I watched it happen for years, biting my tongue, keeping my head down, and focusing entirely on my code. I knew the algorithm I was developing had the potential to revolutionize early detection in oncology. I knew its worth. But in that house, my worth was zero. I pulled my old Honda into the cracked asphalt of my apartment complex parking lot. The check engine light flickered a familiar orange glow. I cut the engine and sat in the quiet for a moment. The memories of being sidelined, of being told I was less than, of watching family resources poured into a bottomless pit of vanity while I struggled to eat, they did not hurt anymore. They just fueled me. I grabbed my diploma off the passenger seat. The gold seal gleamed even in the dim light of the parking lot. I did not need the Porsche. I did not need the country club. I had built an empire in the shadows, and the sun was finally about to rise. As I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was not a text from my mother. It was an email notification. I opened my inbox and stopped dead in the middle of the staircase. The sender was Jonathan Pierce. The subject line read simply, "Acquisition offer." My thumb hovered over the screen. I tapped the email to open it. It was shockingly brief, sent directly from the desk of Jonathan Pierce, the CEO of Pierce Health, a $12 billion medical conglomerate. The message simply stated that his lead analysts had finished reviewing the encrypted beta version of my algorithm I had submitted 3 months ago. The final line read, "Expect a call in 5 minutes." Exactly 30 seconds later, my phone began to vibrate in my palm. An unknown New York number flashed on the screen. I took a steadying breath, leaned against the chipped paint of my apartment wall, and answered. Cassidy speaking, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Dr. Cassidy, this is Jonathan Pierce. The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, and completely devoid of pleasantries. He did not ask how my day was. He did not mention my graduation. He spoke with the terrifying efficiency of a man whose time was worth thousands of dollars a minute. Mr. Pierce. Thank you for reaching out. I will cut right to the chase, he continued. My engineering team has spent the last 72 hours trying to break your genomic sequencing model. They failed. Your algorithm processes predictive oncology data 40% faster than the industry standard. It is brilliant, and quite frankly, it makes our current systems look like they were built in the Stone Age. I stared at the peeling wallpaper of my hallway. My family had called my degree pointless just hours ago, yet the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire was telling me I had outsmarted his entire research and development department. I appreciate the feedback, I replied smoothly. I built it to be impenetrable. And you succeeded, Jonathan said. Pierce Health wants to acquire the exclusive rights to your algorithm immediately. We are prepared to offer you a lump sum of $7.2 million for full ownership. The number hung in the air. $7.2 million. It was a sum so large it almost felt abstract. It was enough to pay off my student loans 100 times over. It was enough to buy Diane's Connecticut mansion in cash. But I did not gasp. I did not cry. My years of being suppressed by my family forged an ironclad composure. I am listening, I said calmly. Furthermore, acquiring the tech is not enough, he added. We need the architect. I am offering you the position of Senior Director of Risk Analysis and Data Integration at Pierce Health. Your starting base salary will be $450,000 a year, plus generous stock options. We want you to oversee the implementation of your software across our entire network. You would report directly to the board. This was it. The absolute validation of every sleepless night, every skipped meal, and every condescending comment I had ever endured from my mother and sister. They had practically begged me to get a normal job, to stop chasing foolish academic dreams and settle for mediocrity. Now, I was being handed the keys to the kingdom at one of the most powerful medical corporations in the country. There is one condition, Jonathan continued, his tone turning slightly sharper. We are currently undergoing a massive portfolio expansion. We recently acquired a venture capital firm, and we are restructuring their assets. We need someone ruthless to manage the data risk side of that transition. You will be handling sensitive financial overlaps. I need to know you have the stomach for corporate warfare, Cassidy, because in this position, you will be making decisions that ruin people's bad investments. I thought about Kendrick and his fake finance jargon. I thought about Britney's failing organic makeup brand that Diane constantly funded. I thought about the 3 empty chairs at my graduation. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Mr. Pierce, I can assure you I have an incredibly strong stomach for dismantling bad investments, I replied. Excellent. My legal team will email the contracts within the hour. Have your lawyer review them. I want you in our Manhattan office by 8 Monday morning to sign the finalized paperwork. Welcome to Pierce Health, Dr. Cassidy. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My hands were not shaking. My heart was beating in a slow, powerful rhythm. I walked into my cramped living room, sat down on my thrifted sofa, and looked at the glowing screen of my laptop. $7.2 million. An executive suite. I had just become the most powerful person in my bloodline, and none of them had the slightest clue. The irony was deeply intoxicating. While they were busy pretending to be rich and successful for their social media followers, I had quietly secured a genuine empire. I opened my laptop to begin reviewing the incoming legal documents from Pierce Health. Every line of legal jargon detailing my multi-million-dollar payout felt like a solid brick being laid for an impenetrable fortress. I was untouchable now. The PDF attachment arrived exactly 3 minutes after I ended the call with Jonathan. I clicked the file, watching the pages load slowly on my cracked, flickering monitor. There it was, in crisp font. $7,200,000 payable upon signing. Below that, the terms of my executive employment at Pierce Health outlined a base salary that made my head spin, with comprehensive benefits and full authority over the venture capital integration project. I read through the non-disclosure agreements, the intellectual property transfer clauses, and the executive code of conduct. Everything was perfectly structured. I forwarded the entire package to my attorney with a single sentence attached. Review and approve by Sunday evening. I hit send, leaned back in my chair, and let out a long, slow breath. For the first time in my 33 years, I felt entirely secure. I did not just have a safety net, I owned the entire circus. Just as I was closing my email client, the harsh, jarring chime of my phone broke the silence of my apartment. I glanced down at the screen, expecting a confirmation from my lawyer. Instead, the name Diane flashed brightly, illuminating the dark room. It had been less than 4 hours since she texted me to call my graduation pointless and tell me to stop embarrassing the family. I picked up the phone, sliding my thumb across the screen to read the incoming message. Family meeting tomorrow at the house, the text read. Be there by noon. Brittany is having some issues, and we need to discuss a solution. Come make yourself useful for once. Do not be late. I stared at the words, the glowing letters reflecting in my eyes. Make yourself useful for once. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her demand was almost impressive. She had not bothered to ask how I was doing. She had not offered a single word of apology for skipping the ceremony where I received my doctorate. Instead, she immediately pivoted to treating me like a disposable utility, summoning me to her suburban kingdom to serve whatever crisis my golden child sister had managed to create. I set the phone down next to my laptop, right beside the screen, displaying my multi-million-dollar corporate buyout. The contrast was almost poetic. On one side of the desk, the absolute pinnacle of technological achievement and financial independence. On the other side, the demanding, toxic leash of a family that only valued me when they needed a scapegoat or a quick fix. In the past, a text like that would have sent my anxiety spiraling. I would have spent the entire night wondering what I had done wrong, stressing over how to appease them, and agonizing over whatever impossible demand they were going to place on my shoulders. I would have driven to Connecticut feeling small, inadequate, and utterly defeated before I even walked through the front door. But tonight was different. Tonight the text did not feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation to a chess match where my opponent did not realize the board had already been flipped. A family meeting meant an ambush. I knew the playbook by heart. Diane would pour expensive wine, put on a face of strained maternal concern, and slowly tighten the emotional screws until she got what she wanted. Kendrick would sit in the corner, projecting fake authority, while Brittany played the helpless victim. They wanted something from me. They always did. Whether they needed free labor or simply someone to belittle to make themselves feel vastly superior, I was always their target. But whatever they were planning, whatever trap they had set, they were operating on incredibly outdated information. They still thought I was the broke, desperate student clinging to an unmarketable degree. They had no idea I was the incoming senior director of risk analysis for the company that was quietly buying up their world. I picked up the phone, stared at the bright screen, and typed a simple reply. I will be there. I did not ask questions. I did not demand an apology for the graduation text. I gave them exactly the compliant silence they expected. Let them think they still had the upper hand. Let them blindly prepare their guilt trips, their fake tears, and their endless gaslighting. I was going to walk into that Connecticut mansion tomorrow, not as the family disappointment, but as their executioner. I left my desk, walked to the kitchen, and poured a cold glass of tap water. I raised the heavy glass in a silent toast to the empty room. Tomorrow afternoon, they were all going to get the shocking family meeting of a lifetime. And I was going to make absolutely sure that they remembered it forever. The next morning, I drove up the winding, perfectly paved roads of Fairfield County. The transition from my gritty neighborhood to the manicured estates of Connecticut always felt like crossing into an alternate reality. I pulled my faded silver Honda Civic into my mother's expansive circular driveway. My car sat like a rusted tin can between Diane's pristine white Range Rover and Kendrick's aggressive matte black Mercedes SUV. I turned off the sputtering engine, grabbed my worn canvas tote bag, and walked up the sweeping brick steps to the front door. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the suffocating chill of central air conditioning and lavender room spray. The house looked exactly as it always did. It was a sterile showroom of wealth designed strictly to impress guests who did not actually care about us. Everything was draped in beige and gold, looking more like a luxury hotel lobby than a home. I walked toward the sunken living room, the heels of my cheap boots clicking against the imported Italian marble floor. They were already waiting for me. Diane was perched on the edge of a cream-colored velvet sofa nursing a crystal glass of sparkling water. Brittany sat across from her wearing an oversized designer sweater that cost more than my monthly rent, looking strategically distressed. Beside her stood Kendrick. Kendrick leaned against the marble fireplace mantel, attempting to project the relaxed confidence of a Wall Street titan. He was a tall, strikingly handsome African-American man who always dressed like he was 5 minutes away from ringing the opening bell at the stock exchange. Today he wore a tailored navy blazer and a smug expression that I knew all too well. He twirled a heavy gold watch around his wrist, sizing me up as I stood in the doorway. Brittany let out a dramatic sigh as soon as she saw me, rolling her eyes. "Well, look who finally decided to join the real world," Kendrick announced, his voice dripping with condescension. He pushed off the mantel and walked toward me. "I see the old Honda is still fighting for its life out there in the driveway. We were starting to wonder if it broke down on the highway." I offered a flat, polite smile. "The car runs just fine, Kendrick. I am here." "What is the emergency?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Diane waved her hand dismissively. "Do not rush us, Cassidy. Have a seat. You look exhausted. Did you even sleep last night, or were you too busy celebrating your little graduation by yourself?" She emphasized the word little as if I had just completed a weekend seminar instead of a rigorous doctoral program. Kendrick chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that filled the room. "Yeah, congratulations on the degree, Cass. A PhD in what was it again? Biological something." He did not wait for my answer. "I hope you practiced your latte art. With a highly specialized, pointless degree like that, you are going to need to be the best barista in the city to pay off those student loans." Brittany let out a sharp, mean laugh, pulling her knees to her chest. "Kendrick, stop it," she said, though her tone was entirely encouraging. "You know she is sensitive about her career choices. Not all of us are cut out to be executives or business owners. Some people just want to stay in school forever to avoid paying taxes." I stood there, letting their insults wash over me. In the past, this coordinated attack would have crushed me. I would have defensively tried to explain the complexities of genomic sequencing, practically begging them to understand the value of my work. I would have scrambled for their respect. But standing in that overpriced living room, knowing there was a $7 million contract sitting on my kitchen counter, their mockery sounded like the frantic chirping of insects. I did not feel humiliated. I felt pity for them. They were so desperate to maintain their hierarchy, so eager to tear me down to inflate their own fragile egos. I slowly lowered my canvas bag to the floor and took a seat on the stiff accent chair opposite them. I crossed my legs, folded my hands in my lap, and looked directly at Kendrick. His smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second under my unwavering gaze. "I am not looking for a job at a coffee shop," I said softly, allowing a tiny, razor-sharp smile to touch the corners of my mouth. "I am doing just fine." "Now my mother said you two had an issue. Let us hear it." Diane immediately shot Kendrick a warning look, holding up a manicured hand to silence him. The temperature in the room shifted as she transformed her demeanor. Her harsh posture dissolved into something dangerously soft and maternal. She stood up from the velvet sofa, smoothing her silk blouse, and walked over to the mahogany bar cart. "Let us not start fighting," Diane said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We are all adults here. Cassidy just drove a long way, and today is about supporting each other." She picked up a heavy crystal decanter and poured a dark red wine into oversized goblets. "I brought out the reserve for today. It is important that we remember what truly matters. Family." I watched her carefully as she handed me a glass. I did not take a sip. I just held the cool crystal against my palm, observing the performance. This was classic Diane. Whenever she needed something, she weaponized the concept of family. Growing up, the word family was never a comfort. It was always a tool for extraction. When she wanted me to cancel college study sessions to babysit Brittany, it was about family. When she demanded I hand over my meager savings to pay for Brittany to go on vacation, it was about family. Now, sitting in a house I was barred from enjoying sipping wine that cost more than my groceries, I knew this performance was building toward a massive ask. Diane returned to the sofa, sitting closely next to Brittany and placing a comforting hand on her knee. "The world out there is brutal, Cassidy." Diane continued, her eyes wide with feigned sincerity. "You are just stepping into it, so you might not understand the pressures yet. But out in the real world, the only people you can count on are your blood. We have to stick together. If one of us falls, the others must be there to catch them." Brittany leaned into our mother, looking appropriately fragile. She stared at her designer shoes, biting her lip, in an exaggerated display of anxiety. Kendrick remained by the fireplace, crossing his arms, trying to maintain his aura of financial control, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The silence stretched across the room. They were waiting for me to take the bait. They wanted me to ask what was wrong, to show concern, to play the role of the eager daughter who just wanted to belong to the inner circle. In the past, the heavy silence would have broken me. I would have rushed to fill the void, offering help before I knew the problem, desperate for their approval. But today, I simply let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. I took a deliberate sip of the wine, keeping my expression blank. I did not nod in agreement. I did not smile. I just waited. The lack of an emotional reaction unsettled them. Kendrick shifted his weight awkwardly, and Brittany shot a panicked glance at our mother. Diane cleared her throat, realizing that her emotional groundwork was failing to soften me up. She adjusted her posture, sitting up straighter. "Well," Diane said, her sweet tone faltering slightly before she forced it back into place. "As you know, Brittany and Kendrick have been working incredibly hard over the past few years. Brittany's organic cosmetics line has been expanding rapidly. She has warehouse spaces, a marketing team, and massive inventory orders. It is a complex operation, far beyond what most people can comprehend. And Kendrick has been managing the venture capital side flawlessly. They are on the verge of a massive breakthrough, an absolute empire." I nodded slowly, still refusing to give them a verbal lifeline. Brittany finally spoke, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "It is just that the market has been unpredictable lately, Cassidy. We had a delay with a major distributor and it caused a tiny ripple in our cash flow. It is completely temporary. Just a minor administrative bottleneck, really." Kendrick interjected, stepping forward to reclaim the narrative. "It is a standard liquidity crunch, very common in high-growth startups. We have millions in projected revenue tied up. We just need a short-term bridge to cover costs until the capital unlocks. It is barely a blip on the radar." I looked at Kendrick, then at Brittany, and finally at Diane. The trap was set. They had painted a picture of temporary hardship in the middle of success. I set my wine glass down on the coffee table with a soft clink. It sounded like a gavel dropping. "A temporary bottleneck," I repeated evenly. "How much of a bridge are we talking about exactly?" Kendrick cleared his throat loudly, adjusting his tailored navy blazer as if preparing for a boardroom presentation. He refused to make direct eye contact with me, instead focusing on the crystal decanter on the table. "It is $500,000, he stated, attempting to sound incredibly casual, as if he were asking me to cover the cost of a moderately priced dinner. $500,000 exactly. The number hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous, contrasting sharply with the lavender-scented luxury of my mother's living room. I did not gasp. I did not drop my wine glass. I simply stared at him, my face a carefully constructed mask of polite curiosity. $500,000 for a temporary bottleneck, I replied, making sure my voice betrayed absolutely no emotion. That is quite a significant bridge. Brittany jumped in, her voice pitched high with manufactured urgency. It sounds like a lot, Cassidy, but in the corporate world it is barely anything. We just need to secure the warehouse lease and pay the overseas manufacturers. The banks are just being completely unreasonable right now because of a few late payments on my end. They do not understand the vision of my brand. Kendrick nodded vigorously, eager to regain control of the narrative. Exactly. Traditional lenders look at outdated metrics. They see high credit utilization and they panic. What they fail to see is the projected quarterly growth. We have the revenue stream mapped out. We just need a guarantor, a co-signer to appease the underwriters, someone with an unblemished financial record to vouch for the loan. And that is where you come in, sweetheart, Diane said, leaning forward and resting her hand gently on my knee. Her touch felt cold and calculated. We know you do not have much, Cassidy. We know you live a very modest life in that little apartment. But precisely because you never buy anything, because you never take risks, your credit score is immaculate. You have no mortgage, no car payments, and you have consistently made your student loan payments. You are a ghost to the credit bureaus, and right now, that makes you incredibly valuable. I looked down at her hand on my knee, then back up to her face. Let me make sure I understand this perfectly, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You want me, the woman with the pointless degree who you just suggested should become a barista, to co-sign a $500,000 commercial loan for a cosmetic company? Kendrick waved his hand dismissively. Do not get hung up on jokes, Cassidy. This is business. You would not actually be paying a single dime. It is purely a formality, a signature on a piece of paper. We make the monthly payments, the capital unlocks in 6 months, and we refinance you right off the loan. You will not even notice it happened. It is about family equity. Diane added, her eyes wide and pleading. You would be saving your sister's dream. And of course, we would make it worth your while. Brittany wants to offer you a title, something like Honorary Vice President of Operations. It would look fantastic on your resume when you finally start looking for real jobs. The sheer unadulterated audacity of their proposal was staggering. They had spent my entire life financially and emotionally starving me. They had mocked my choices, belittled my education, and abandoned me on my graduation day. Now they were sitting in a multi-million-dollar mansion, wearing designer clothes, asking me to assume $500,000 of legal liability to fund their fake lifestyle. They viewed my years of living in near poverty, my careful budgeting, and my financial discipline as a resource they were inherently entitled to harvest. I took another long, slow sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch out again. I looked at Brittany, who was chewing on her thumbnail, shedding her confident CEO persona for the anxious child she actually was. I looked at Kendrick, the fake finance guru who could not secure a standard business loan. And finally, I looked at Diane, the architect of this entire toxic dynamic. They genuinely believed I was foolish enough to sign my financial life away for a meaningless title and a scrap of their conditional approval. They thought I was still the desperate, isolated girl begging for a seat at their table. They had absolutely no idea I was currently holding an employment contract worth over $7 million, or that my new position literally required me to systematically dismantle bad investments exactly like theirs. I placed my glass gently back onto the mahogany coffee table, making sure it aligned perfectly with the coaster. I looked directly into my mother's eager and incredibly expectant dark eyes. No, I said softly, holding her gaze without blinking or looking away. It was a single flat syllable. It held absolutely no apology, no hesitation, and no room for negotiation. I did not soften the blow with any excuses about my income, my rent, or my future plans. I simply denied them all completely. For a few seconds, the room was absolutely silent. The polite, collaborative atmosphere Diane had so carefully constructed shattered into a million jagged pieces. Brittany dropped her hand from her mouth and stared at me, genuinely shocked that I had the nerve to refuse her. Kendrick stiffened his relaxed, confident posture, immediately transforming into defensive anger. But it was my mother who reacted the most drastically. The maternal warmth vanished from her face in an instant, replaced by a cold, hard fury that I recognized perfectly from my childhood. She slammed her crystal wine glass down onto the table, splashing the expensive red liquid over the rim. "Excuse me, Diane," snapped her voice, dropping a full octave. "Did you just say no? After everything I just explained to you, after everything we are trying to build for this family?" "I said no," I repeated calmly, leaning back into the stiff accent chair. "I am not co-signing a $500,000 commercial loan for a failing cosmetic brand." "Failing?" Brittany shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. "It is not failing, you ignorant little brat. You know absolutely nothing about business. You just sit in your tiny apartment staring at a computer screen all day." Diane stood up, towering over me. "How dare you speak to your sister that way?" she hissed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. "How dare you walk into my house and act so incredibly selfish? You have always been like this, Cassidy. Always so ungrateful, so utterly obsessed with yourself and your pointless little projects. Do you have any idea what I sacrificed to raise you? Do you know what it cost to put food on your plate and a roof over your head for 18 years? I kept my face completely blank as she launched into her well-worn script. It was the same list of basic parental obligations she always weaponized whenever I stepped out of line. She aggressively listed the clothes she bought me in middle school, the medical bills from when I broke my arm at age 12, and the electricity I consumed while living under her roof. She spoke as if providing the bare minimum requirements of raising a child was a massive financial investment that I had cruelly failed to pay dividends on. "We let you live here, rent-free until you went off to college," Diane continued, her voice echoing loudly off the marble floors. "We drove you to your boring science fairs. I spent my best years ensuring you had a stable foundation, and this is exactly how you repay me. By letting your own flesh and blood face financial ruin because you are too cowardly to sign a simple piece of paper." Kendrick stepped forward, crossing his arms tightly across his broad chest. "Your mother is right, Cassidy. You owe this to your sister. Brittany is out here actually taking huge risks, building real generational wealth for all of us while you play it safe. You are hoarding your perfect credit score for what? You do not own a house. You do not have a business. You are hoarding a financial resource that could save this entire family out of pure spite and jealousy. You owe us." Diane echoed, stepping even closer to me, until her shadow fell across my lap. "You owe Brittany. She has always been the one to keep this family together while you isolate yourself in that pathetic apartment. You are going to sign those bank documents, Cassidy. You are going to step up and act like a real member of this family for once in your miserable life." She glared at me, her chest heaving with manufactured indignation. She fully expected me to break. She expected me to apologize, to cry, to fold under the weight of her manipulative guilt trip, just like I always did when I was a teenager. She thought her harsh words would strip away my confidence and leave me begging for her forgiveness. But I was not a teenager anymore. I did not need her roof, I did not need her food, and I certainly did not need her approval. Her manipulative guilt trip was completely ineffective today. It just proved exactly how desperate they were. I looked up at her towering figure, completely unfazed by her screaming. I had let her talk for long enough. Now it was finally time to permanently change the absolute rules of the game. I let Diane's furious echoes fade into the high ceilings of the living room. She stood over me, her chest heaving, waiting for the inevitable apology she had conditioned me to give. Instead, I uncrossed my legs, leaned forward, and rested my elbows on my knees. I completely ignored her. I did not defend my childhood gratitude, and I did not address her aggressive list of parental sacrifices. Instead, I shifted my gaze away from her flushed face and locked eyes directly with Kendrick. Kendrick had stepped back during Diane's outburst, looking smugly satisfied that my mother was fighting his battle. But when my eyes met his smug smile faltered. You know I said, my voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room like a scalpel. There is a glaring hole in this entire presentation. You brought me all the way out here, poured expensive wine, and launched a coordinated emotional attack to secure my signature. But you completely skipped the fundamental logic of the transaction. What are you talking about? Brittany snapped, shifting uncomfortably on the velvet sofa. Mom is right. You are just trying to find a way to weasel out of helping us because you are entirely selfish. I am talking about the math, Brittany, I replied smoothly. I turned my attention back to Kendrick, who was suddenly looking incredibly rigid. Kendrick, you are a senior executive at a prominent venture capital firm in Atlanta. You manage multi-million-dollar portfolios. You wear custom Italian suits and drive a $100,000 vehicle. And Brittany, you are the CEO of a rapidly expanding, highly lucrative organic cosmetics empire. You have warehouses, staff, and projected global revenue streams. I paused, letting their fake accolades hang in the air. I watched Kendrick swallow hard. His hand instinctively reached up to adjust his tie. So I continued, my tone deceptively mild. Why exactly are both of your credit scores so completely ruined that a standard commercial bank refuses to lend you a measly $500,000? If your assets are so strong and your revenue is so guaranteed, any basic financial institution would approve that bridge loan in a heartbeat. They would practically beg you to take their money. Instead, they rejected you, both of you. And they rejected you so harshly that you had to resort to begging the sister you openly despise to use her flawless credit to save you. The silence that followed was entirely different from the ones before. It was not a tense, expectant silence. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of panic. Kendrick paled slightly. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, and opened it again. The smooth, fast-talking finance guru was suddenly struggling to formulate a single sentence. Well, he finally stammered, his voice lacking all of its previous booming confidence. It is not that simple, Cassidy. As I mentioned before, the traditional banking sector relies on outdated algorithms. They look at current liquidity ratios rather than projected enterprise value. We have capital, it is just tied up in restricted offshore investment vehicles. Restricted offshore investment vehicles? I repeated slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of the phrase sink in. So you are telling me that you, a Wall Street professional, managed your personal finances so poorly that your credit score is worse than a broke graduate student who just finished living off instant ramen. That is completely out of line, Kendrick raised his voice, stepping forward aggressively. You do not understand high-level finance. You are out of your depth here. My credit utilization is temporarily high due to strategic leverage. It is a calculated risk. Brittany jumped up from the sofa, her hands trembling. Stop attacking my husband. He knows what he is doing. He is a financial genius. The banks are just being conservative right now. If he is a financial genius, then why are you facing financial ruin over a $500,000 bottleneck? I shot back, my voice rising just enough to command absolute authority over the room. Real wealth does not panic over a 6-month delay. Real wealth does not need a guarantor. You are lying to me, both of you. And judging by the look of absolute panic on your face right now, Kendrick, I am guessing you are hiding something massive. Diane stepped between us, her face a mask of furious indignation. Enough. I will not have you come into my home and interrogate my son-in-law like he is some kind of criminal. You are just making excuses to avoid your family obligations. I am looking for the truth, I stated coldly. I stood up, unzipping my heavy canvas tote bag slowly. Unlike all of you, I do not rely on fake stories. I rely on verified data. I pulled my sleek silver laptop from the canvas tote bag and set it gently onto the mahogany coffee table, pushing aside the crystal wine glasses to make room. Kendrick watched my movements with a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. He let out a harsh, patronizing laugh, shaking his head, as if he were dealing with a stubborn toddler who had just pulled out a coloring book during a serious adult conversation. Put the computer away, Cassidy, he ordered, his voice dripping with condescension. We are not asking you to analyze a spreadsheet or run a science experiment. This is high-level corporate finance. You cannot just Google your way out of understanding macroeconomic principles. I ignored him, tapping the keyboard to wake the screen. My eyes scanned the room until I spotted the wireless casting module plugged into the massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. I quickly synced my display to the network. Kendrick took a step closer, towering over the table, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "You are completely out of your depth," he continued, his tone growing louder and more aggressive. "You sit in a lab all day looking at cells, so I do not expect you to grasp the complexities of venture capital restructuring. Let me explain this in terms simple enough for you to understand. We are currently navigating unprecedented market volatility. The Federal Reserve has engaged in aggressive quantitative tightening, which has completely dried up the mezzanine financing markets. Brittany's company is highly leveraged, yes, but it is structured that way intentionally to maximize our EBITDA multiples. We are optimizing our capital stack. It is a standard liquidity trap caused by temporary macroeconomic headwinds, not a fundamental flaw in the business model." Brittany nodded along vigorously, clearly not understanding a single word her husband was saying, but desperate to project an image of solidarity. "Exactly," she chimed in, crossing her arms defensively. "We are optimizing the capital stack. It is totally standard." Diane shot me a furious glare. "Listen to him, Cassidy. He works with millions of dollars every single day. He knows exactly how these systems operate. You are embarrassing yourself by trying to play detective." Kendrick smirked, fueled by my mother's unwavering support. He adjusted his tailored blazer and adopted the tone of a weary professor lecturing a remarkably slow student. "The traditional commercial banking sector is notoriously risk-averse right now," he explained, waving his hand dismissively. "They look at our debt-to-equity ratio, and they flinch because their algorithms are rigid and outdated. They do not factor in our projected quarterly growth or the proprietary nature of our supply chain. The $500,000 bridge loan is simply a synthetic hedge. We use your pristine credit score to secure a lower interest rate on a short-term debt facility, which allows us to bypass the restrictive covenants of our primary lenders. Once the next tranche of Series B funding clears, we retire the debt facility, and your name is removed completely. It is practically a clerical maneuver." He spoke rapidly, layering buzzword over buzzword in a desperate attempt to build a wall of financial jargon so dense that I would simply give up and sign the papers out of sheer confusion. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Make the victim feel stupid, make the problem sound impossibly complex, and present the demanded solution as the only logical way forward. In his mind, I was just a naive academic who would be easily bullied into submission by terms like synthetic hedge and capital stack. He genuinely believed his expensive suit and loud voice made him the smartest person in the room. I kept my face entirely expressionless as I finished typing my secure password into the terminal. The massive television screen above the fireplace suddenly flickered to life, mirroring my laptop display in crisp, high-definition resolution. Kendrick stopped his rant mid-sentence, staring up at the screen in confusion. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice losing its confident edge. I did not answer him immediately. Instead, I opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. The folder contained the raw data I had pulled from public records, corporate filings, and the back-end financial footprints I had access to during my algorithm development. I arranged the windows perfectly on the screen so that every single number, every single hidden debt, and every single unpaid invoice was clearly visible. I finally looked up from my keyboard, meeting Kendrick's panicked eyes. "I understand macroeconomic principles perfectly well, Kendrick," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the silent living room. "I also understand that a synthetic hedge is not a magical spell you can cast to make massive, unrecoverable debts disappear. Here." I tapped the spacebar on my laptop, and a complex flowchart expanded to fill the entire 85-inch screen. The room fell into a stunned silence as the vibrant colors of the chart illuminated their shocked faces. This, I said, pointing toward the television, is the actual capital stack of Brittany's organic cosmetics empire. I pulled these figures from public vendor liens, shipping manifests, and state tax filings over the last 36 months. There is no Series B funding on the horizon. There is no massive quarterly growth. There is only a catastrophic mountain of high-interest debt. Brittany stumbled forward, her designer sweater suddenly looking too large for her shrinking posture. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice shrill with absolute panic. "That is private company information. You hacked my secure accounts." "I did not hack anyone, Brittany," I replied calmly. "You just left a massive digital footprint of unpaid bills across 3 different states. Let us look at the warehouse lease you mentioned earlier." I highlighted a bright red block on the screen with my cursor. "You have not paid your primary distributor in New Jersey since late February. Instead of generating revenue from your existing inventory, you took out a merchant cash advance at an astronomical 45% interest rate just to cover the minimum payments on your previous business loans. You are not running a business," I continued, my voice steady and unforgiving. "You are running a small-scale Ponzi scheme. You take capital from new predatory lenders purely to pay off the older predatory lenders. The organic makeup you pretend to sell is currently sitting in a damp storage facility, expiring rapidly because you cannot afford the shipping fees to fulfill your actual customer orders. Your profit margins are completely non-existent." Diane gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck by the undeniable numbers. "Cassidy, stop this nonsense right now," she commanded, though her voice visibly shook. "You do not understand how modern retail works at all. Brittany has hundreds of thousands of online followers. Her brand is incredibly valuable to future investors." I clicked another folder, bringing up a separate spreadsheet full of raw analytics. "Followers do not pay commercial leases, Diane," I countered, "especially when over 70% of those followers are purchased bot accounts from cheap overseas servers." I ran a basic diagnostic on her engagement metrics late last night. The entire brand is a complete illusion built on lies. Every single dollar you handed her, every loan she secured, was poured into marketing a fake aesthetic rather than building an actual functioning supply chain. She is currently burning through $50,000 a month just to keep up appearances on her various social media platforms. That is exactly why the legitimate commercial banks laughed you out of their corporate offices. They saw the exact same data I am showing you right now on this screen. Brittany sank heavily back onto the velvet sofa, covering her face with her trembling hands. The confident chief executive persona had completely vanished, replaced by the harsh reality of a woman drowning in her own vanity. Kendrick stood completely frozen by the fireplace, his eyes darting frantically across the illuminated screen as he tried to find a single mathematical error to exploit. But the numbers were absolute and undeniably accurate. "Data does not care about your fragile ego," I said softly, looking directly at my weeping sister. "It does not care about your expensive designer clothes or your perfectly curated internet aesthetic. You are currently in default on 3 separate commercial loans, Brittany. You do not need a temporary financial bridge. You are completely and utterly bankrupt." Diane looked back and forth between the glowing screen and her sobbing golden child, her jaw incredibly tight with furious denial. She could not accept that her ultimate masterpiece was a total financial failure. She turned aggressively to Kendrick, desperate for him to use his Wall Street expertise to fix the broken narrative. "Kendrick, tell her she is wrong," Diane pleaded desperately. "Show her the real revenue projections. Prove to her that this is just a minor administrative misunderstanding." But Kendrick did not move an inch. He was staring at the silver laptop resting on the coffee table as if it were a live explosive device. He swallowed, hard beads of nervous sweat forming quickly on his forehead. I smiled a very cold, razor-sharp smile. "Oh, do not worry," I said, shifting my piercing gaze from my ruined sister directly to my panicked brother-in-law. "We are not finished here yet. Now it is Kendrick's turn. Let us take a close look at your brilliant financial portfolio next." I pressed the right arrow key on my keyboard. The massive television screen shifted instantly from Brittany's disastrous corporate footprint to a fresh, terrifyingly detailed dashboard. The logo of Kendrick's prestigious Atlanta venture capital firm flashed brightly across the top of the display, followed immediately by a scanned copy of a confidential termination agreement. Kendrick physically recoiled as if the television had just reached out and struck him. He took 2 rapid steps backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the expensive Persian rug. You cannot show that he stammered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. That is subject to a strict non-disclosure agreement. You are violating federal privacy laws. I rested my hands flat against the mahogany table. Do not try to lecture me about federal laws while you are actively attempting to commit loan fraud, I shot back smoothly. I did not hack into your former employer's servers. I simply pulled public arbitration filings and cross-referenced them with the back-end metadata from your desperate LinkedIn updates. You have been posting inspirational quotes about market disruption for 8 weeks, but the reality is much less glamorous. I tapped the screen again, highlighting a specific paragraph in bright yellow. You are not on a strategic sabbatical. You were fired 2 months ago, and you were not quietly let go during routine layoffs. You were terminated for gross incompetence. The documents clearly state that you completely mismanaged a critical tech acquisition, costing your firm over $4 million in regulatory fines. They escorted you out of the building by security and clawed back your entire severance package. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the central air conditioning. Brittany slowly turned her head to look at her husband. The tears streaming down her face had temporarily stopped, replaced by profound, horrifying confusion. "Kendrick," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is she talking about? You told me you took a leave of absence to help me manage the cosmetics expansion. You said we had millions in restricted equity." Kendrick could not look at her. He stared at his expensive Italian leather shoes, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. "Answer her!" Diane demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "Tell me this is another one of Cassidy's twisted manipulations. Tell me you still have your executive position." I did not wait for his pathetic excuses. I hit another key, bringing up his personal financial summary. "He cannot answer you because he knows I am holding the receipts," I said coldly. "Let us look at the restricted offshore equity." I pointed to a staggering negative integer displayed in bold red font. "You currently owe over $80,000 on 3 separate maxed-out platinum credit cards. The matte black Mercedes SUV sitting in the driveway right now is 3 months behind on its lease payments. There is an active repossession order filed in the state of Georgia. If you drive that car back across state lines, it will be towed immediately. You do not have a venture capital portfolio. You do not even have a savings account. You are a complete financial fraud wearing a custom-tailored suit you bought on credit." Kendrick finally snapped. He lunged forward, slamming his hands down onto the coffee table right next to my laptop. "Shut your mouth!" he roared, his face contorted in absolute rage. "You think you are so smart. You do not know what it takes to survive in my world. I had a bad quarter. It was a temporary setback. I needed a little bit of runway to get my new fund off the ground." "A temporary setback," I repeated, leaning closer to him without an ounce of fear. "You lied to your wife. You lied to my mother. You orchestrated this entire family meeting to manipulate me into taking on $500,000 of toxic debt just so you could maintain the illusion of being a wealthy executive. You wanted me to become the sacrificial lamb for your failures." Brittany stood up from the sofa, her hands shaking violently. She looked at the screen, reading the termination clause and the massive credit card balances. Then she looked at the husband she had constantly paraded around as her ultimate trophy. "You have no money," Brittany gasped, the realization finally crashing down on her. "You told me to expand the warehouse lease because you promised you had the capital to back it up. You told me to ignore the bank warnings. You ruined me." Kendrick spun around to face her, his defensive anger shifting immediately toward his wife. "I ruined you," he shouted back, waving his arms wildly. You were burning through $50,000 a month before I even got fired. You were burning through $50,000 a month before I even got fired. The words hung in the air like a physical strike. Brittany flinched, but the shock quickly twisted into a vicious defensive rage. "Do not you dare blame me for your pathetic failures," she screamed, taking a step toward him. "My brand needed marketing. It needed visibility. You were supposed to be the financial wizard. You promised me we had an unlimited safety net. You stood at our wedding and bragged to my entire family about your portfolio. You are nothing but a con artist." Kendrick let out a cruel, bitter laugh that echoed harshly against the marble floor. "Your brand?" He mocked, his face twisting with disgust. "Your brand is a complete joke, Brittany. You sell cheap rebranded lotion in expensive glass bottles. Nobody was buying it. The only reason your company stayed afloat for the past 2 years is because I was illegally shuffling funds from my client accounts to cover your ridiculous marketing invoices. That is why I got fired. I compromised my entire career to fund your desperate need for internet validation." Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "You stole money to pay for my company," she whispered, her voice cracking with absolute terror. "Are you insane? Do you know what kind of legal trouble that puts me in?" "It puts you in the exact same boat as me," Kendrick snarled, leaning down so he was eye level with her. "We are drowning together. You think you can just walk away from this and pretend you are an innocent victim? The bank accounts are jointly held. Your name is on the commercial lease. When the creditors come knocking, they are going to repossess everything: your warehouse, your inventory, and all of your precious designer bags. You are just as broke as I am. Stop it! Both of you stop it right this instant!" Diane shrieked, waving her arms frantically as she inserted herself directly between them. Her face was flushed dark red and her eyes darted nervously toward the large bay windows facing the street, terrified that the neighbors might hear the screaming. "Have you completely lost your minds? We do not air our dirty laundry like this. We are a respectable family. We can fix this. We just need to sit down, calm down, and make a plan." "There is no plan," Mom, Brittany sobbed, her perfect posture crumbling as she collapsed back onto the sofa. She pulled her knees to her chest, crying hysterically. "He ruined my life. He lied to me for months. I want a divorce. I want him out of this house." Kendrick rolled his eyes, adjusting his suit jacket with a gesture of pure disdain. "Go ahead and call a lawyer, Brittany. See how much they charge for a retainer. Because I guarantee you cannot afford one. You have absolutely nothing left for me to take." Diane grabbed Kendrick by the arm, digging her manicured nails into his sleeve. "You are not leaving," she hissed, her voice vibrating with panic. "You are going to stay right here and help me clean up this mess. If word gets out that you lost your job and Brittany is bankrupt, we will be completely ruined. The country club board will revoke our membership. My reputation in this community will be destroyed. I will not allow you to humiliate me like this." I sat perfectly still in the stiff accent chair, watching the absolute destruction of their carefully curated kingdom. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to hurl insults or defend my own choices. The data I had projected onto the television screen was doing all the work for me. The illusion of the golden child and the wealthy tech bro was entirely shattered, leaving behind nothing but three deeply insecure people fighting desperately over the scraps of their fake wealth. They were completely ignoring me now, too consumed by their own internal implosion to remember why they had summoned me here in the first place. But Diane was not ready to surrender. As the reality of their bankruptcy settled over the room, her panicked eyes darted around until they finally locked onto me. She let go of Kendrick and slowly walked toward my chair. Her face contorted into a deeply unsettling mask of desperation. The arrogant, commanding mother from 10 minutes ago was gone. In her place was a terrified woman grasping at her final lifeline. "Cassidy." Diane pleaded, her voice trembling as she knelt on the Persian rug right in front of me. "You see what is happening here. You see how desperate we are. You must sign that loan document now. If you do not help, they will seize everything." I looked down at the woman kneeling on the expensive Persian rug. My mother, the woman who had spent her entire life cultivating an image of absolute superiority, was literally groveling at my feet. Her perfectly styled hair was beginning to unravel, and her makeup was smudged from the panicked tears welling in her eyes. I smoothly pulled my arms back, resting them firmly on the arms of the accent chair. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "I am not signing anything, Diane. Your financial ruin is the direct result of your own arrogance and your absolute refusal to hold your golden child accountable. You enabled Brittany to build a fraudulent company, and you allowed Kendrick to operate his entire life as a con artist. You let them burn through every single dollar you had because you cared more about how things looked than what was actually real. Now the bill has finally arrived." Diane let out a choked, desperate sob. She looked back at Brittany, entirely unresponsive to the crisis. Then Diane looked at Kendrick, who had retreated into the furthest corner of the living room, completely abandoning any pretense of protecting the family. Seeing that she was entirely alone in this battle, a new kind of desperation took hold of my mother. The pleading sorrow vanished from her face, instantly replaced by the terrifying, frantic energy of a cornered animal. She scrambled up from the floor, her breathing ragged and shallow. "You do not understand what is actually at stake here, Cassidy," she gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the mahogany coffee table where the loan documents sat untouched. "It is not just the warehouse. It is not just the cars. They are going to take this house. My house. The home where you grew up." I kept my expression entirely neutral, leaning back slightly in the chair. "Then you will have to downsize," I replied practically. "Sell the designer furniture, sell the jewelry, move into a smaller apartment like the rest of the world. It is not the end of your life, Diane. It is just the end of your expensive lies." But my logical response only pushed her further over the edge of sanity. She stomped her foot hard against the marble floor, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "I will not live in an apartment!" She shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. "I will not let the women at the country club look down on me. I built this family. I gave everything to make sure we looked perfect. You are going to sign that document right now, or I swear to you, I will make sure you suffer right alongside us." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious about what kind of leverage she mistakenly believed she still possessed. "And exactly how do you plan to make me suffer?" I asked softly. "I have my own money. I have my own career. You have absolutely no control over my life anymore." Diane let out a sharp, hysterical laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. She lunged forward, slamming both of her hands flat against the top of the coffee table. The crystal wine glasses rattled ominously. "Because you are already involved, you ungrateful little brat," she screamed, her eyes wide and manic. "You have been involved for 3 years. Pushed to the absolute brink of panic, Diane finally snapped. "You have to sign it because I used your social security number to take out a second mortgage on this exact house 3 years ago. If you do not bail us out today, the bank takes you down with us. They will ruin that precious credit score you are so incredibly proud of." The living room fell into a dead, horrifying silence. Even Brittany stopped sobbing, her breath hitching as the sheer magnitude of our mother's confession settled over the room. Kendrick stared at Diane with his mouth slightly open, completely stunned that she had committed a massive federal crime right under his nose. Federal identity theft. She had stolen my identity. While she was mocking my cheap car and calling my degree pointless, she had secretly attached my name to a massive mountain of toxic debt just to keep up her wealthy suburban facade. Diane stood panting over the table, staring at me with a twisted look of triumph on her face. She genuinely thought she had completely checkmated me. She thought that by revealing her own felony, she had successfully trapped me into signing the new loan. She believed her horrific betrayal was the ultimate leverage that guaranteed my complete submission and total compliance. She had absolutely no idea about the massive corporate fire she had just intentionally ignited in this room. I let the weight of her confession settle over us. My mother had stolen my identity. The flawless credit score I had built by working double shifts had been secretly hijacked to fund a lifestyle I was actively excluded from. I looked at Diane, who was leaning heavily against the coffee table, waiting for my inevitable surrender. She honestly believed she had won. She believed that tying me to her sinking ship meant I had no choice but to start bailing water. I did not panic. I did not scream. The anger I felt was not hot and chaotic. It was freezing cold and perfectly clear. "You forged my signature on a federal banking document," I stated, making sure my voice remained steady. "You committed identity theft to take out a second mortgage on a property I do not live in." Diane scoffed, waving her hand as if I were being entirely unreasonable. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Cassidy. It is not identity theft when it is your own family. I am your mother. I gave birth to you, I raised you. Everything you have is because of me anyway. I just borrowed your financial standing temporarily because mine was tied up in other investments. It was a strategic family decision. A strategic family decision that you conveniently forgot to tell me about for 3 years," I replied. "It was none of your business," Diane snapped, standing up straight to regain her posture. "You would not have understood the complexities of the real estate market. I did what I had to do to protect this family. Brittany was launching her cosmetics line and she needed seed money. Real seed money, not the pennies you make working in a laboratory. She is a visionary, Cassidy. She has the potential to be a massive success to elevate the family name. I had to prioritize the daughter who was going to make something of herself." The words hung in the air, cruel and entirely unvarnished. She was not even trying to hide her blatant favoritism anymore. In her twisted mind, stealing my identity was completely justified because Brittany was inherently more valuable. "You chose to waste your 20s hiding in libraries," Diane continued, her tone dripping venom. "Brittany was out there networking, building a brand, and establishing a legacy. She deserved that financial backing. You were just sitting on a perfect credit score doing absolutely nothing with it. It was selfish of you to hoard that resource while your sister was out here struggling to launch an empire. I reallocated our assets to where they would be most effective." I glanced over at Brittany. Even she looked slightly horrified by our mother's confession. The golden child was finally realizing the massive criminal lengths Diane had gone to in order to maintain her artificial pedestal. Kendrick was completely silent, slowly backing away toward the hallway. He knew exactly what federal wire fraud entailed, and he clearly wanted absolutely no part of the fallout. I looked back at my mother. Any lingering familial duty I harbored completely evaporated in that exact moment. She had not just stolen my money or my credit. She attempted to steal my future. If I had not discovered this today, she would have let the bank default on that second mortgage, completely destroying my financial life without a second thought. She would have let me take the fall for her vanity. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly, rising from the accent chair. "You committed a major federal crime. You secretly burdened me with hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt. And your grand master plan today was to emotionally terrorize me into signing another $500,000 loan to cover up the fact that you are bankrupt." Diane crossed her arms defiantly. "You are going to sign it, Cassidy. Because if we go down, your perfect little credit score goes down right with us. The bank does not care who actually signed the papers. They only care whose name is on the account. You are trapped." I stood there looking at the three of them. My mother was standing tall, deeply convinced of her own victory. My sister was still sitting on the sofa, staring blankly at the floor. My brother-in-law was calculating his own escape route. They had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies and stolen money, and now they were trying to drag me down into the rubble with them. They thought I was just a naive scientist. They thought I was weak. I took a deep breath, letting the final remnants of my childhood slip away completely. The trap they had spent 3 years building was finally snapping shut, but I was not the one standing inside it. Instead of collapsing into the expected puddle of tears, instead of shouting or pleading, I simply smiled. It was a cold, terrifyingly empty expression that stripped the warmth from my face. For 33 years, I had trained myself to absorb their emotional blows. I had conditioned myself to be the shock absorber for their toxic dysfunction. Diane was standing there, chest heaving, fully expecting the familiar breakdown. She was waiting for the panic to set in for me to frantically grab a pen and sign my life away just to preserve the illusion of our family. But the panic never came. The smile that spread across my lips was so entirely disconnected from the reality of her horrific confession that it instantly silenced the room. The triumphant smirk on Diane's face faltered quickly, replaced by a flicker of deep, primal confusion. Brittany stopped staring at the floor and looked up at me, her red eyes widening in fear. Even Kendrick, who was already inching toward the hallway, stopped dead in his tracks. They had never seen this version of me. They only knew the anxious daughter. They did not know the woman who built impenetrable systems for a living. Diane tried to regain her footing. She slammed her hand against the table again, though this time the gesture lacked its previous authority. "Do you think this is funny?" she demanded, her voice cracking under the weight of my unnerving silence. "I just told you that your name is on a fraudulent federal mortgage. You are legally bound to a debt you cannot pay. I am not joking with you. You are going to sign the new loan documents right now or lose everything." But the more she yelled, the wider my smile became. I looked at her, not as a daughter looking at a mother, but as a predator observing trapped prey. "You really thought you thought of everything I said?" My voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed loudly in the cavernous living room. "You thought you could steal my identity, drain my financial future, and then use the threat of mutual destruction to force me into absolute servitude. It is actually a clever strategy, Diane. It relies on the assumption that I am as broke and desperate as you are. It relies on the assumption that I am terrified of the banking system." I slowly reached into the pocket of my cheap blazer. Diane flinched, instinctively taking a half step back. I did not pull out a pen to sign her ridiculous contract. I pulled out my cell phone. The screen was completely black, reflecting the tense, frozen expressions of the people I used to call my family. "What are you doing?" Brittany asked, her voice trembling. "Are you calling the police? You cannot call the police. Mom will go to prison." I ignored her. I unlocked the screen with my thumb and opened my recent calls list. I tapped the first number at the absolute top of the screen. I lifted the phone to my ear. The silence in the living room was so profound that I could hear the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock standing in the hallway. Everyone just held their breath. They watched me with wide, terrified eyes, paralyzed by the unknown. The line connected on the very first ring. I did not wait for the person on the other end to offer a greeting. I did not explain the situation or ask for help. I looked directly into my mother's terrified, waiting eyes, and I spoke exactly 2 words. "Come in." I lowered the phone from my ear, tapped the red button, and placed the device face down onto the mahogany coffee table beside my glowing laptop screen. The click of the phone hitting the wood sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I leaned back into the stiff accent chair, crossing my legs casually. "Who was that?" Diane whispered, her voice stripped of its arrogant power. "Who did you just call?" I did not answer her. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted, and they could feel the crushing weight of it pressing down on them. Kendrick looked frantically toward the large bay windows, trying to see past the silk curtains to the driveway outside. Brittany grabbed a pillow from the sofa and clutched it against her chest. Diane stood frozen by the table, her eyes darting between my calm face and the heavy oak front door down the hallway. They had spent the last hour trying to trap me in their burning building. They had no idea I was the one who controlled the exits, and the people standing outside were about to show them the flames. The heavy oak front door swung open with a loud, resounding click that echoed down the marble hallway. None of my family members moved. They were completely paralyzed by their own guilt and paranoia. I watched Brittany squeeze her eyes shut, her shoulders bracing, as if she expected a squad of uniformed police officers to storm into the house with their weapons drawn and handcuffs ready. Diane took a sharp, shallow breath, her hands gripping the edge of the mahogany coffee table so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. She stared down the hallway, her face a portrait of absolute dread. She genuinely believed her life as a respected suburban socialite was ending right then and there. She expected to hear the crackle of police radios and the heavy stomp of combat boots. She expected to be read her Miranda rights for committing federal identity theft against her own daughter. But there were no police sirens wailing in the driveway. There were no flashing red and blue lights reflecting against the silk curtains. Instead, the steady, rhythmic sound of expensive leather shoes walking across the Italian marble floor filled the quiet house. 3 figures emerged from the hallway and stepped seamlessly into the sunken living room. They were not wearing police badges or blue uniforms. They were dressed in impeccably tailored dark navy and charcoal gray suits. They carried sleek leather briefcases and moved with the synchronized, ruthless efficiency of high-powered corporate sharks. They looked entirely out of place in my mother's emotionally chaotic living room, yet they immediately commanded absolute authority over the space. Kendrick was the first to recognize exactly what kind of threat had just walked through the front door. Having spent years pretending to be a major player in the venture capital world, he knew a top-tier legal team when he saw one. His eyes darted from the crisp spread collars of their custom shirts to the subtle glint of their expensive cufflinks. He swallowed hard, taking another step back until his shoulders hit the wall. You could practically see the gears grinding in his head as he desperately tried to calculate how my simple phone call had summoned a team of Wall Street lawyers to Fairfield County within seconds. He looked at me, his arrogant facade completely replaced by a deep, genuine fear. He suddenly realized he was no longer the smartest person in the room. He was not even close. Diane remained frozen, her panicked eyes darting between the 3 strangers. "Excuse me," she finally managed to stammer, her voice shaking violently. "Who are you? You cannot just walk into my house. This is private property. I demand to know who let you in right this very second." She tried to muster her usual arrogant tone, attempting to play the role of the offended homeowner, but her voice cracked pitifully. She was terrified. The lead attorney ignored her completely. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. He did not introduce himself to my mother. He did not apologize for the intrusion. He simply adjusted his suit jacket, stepped around the velvet sofa, and walked directly toward the stiff accent chair where I was sitting. The attorney stopped 3 feet away from me. He ignored the spilled wine, the scattered loan documents, and my weeping sister. He looked down at me with an expression of profound professional respect. "Good afternoon, Dr. Cassidy," he said smoothly, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the large room. "I apologize for the slight delay. Traffic on the interstate was unpredictable. We waited outside in the vehicle until we received your signal. Are you ready to proceed with the final execution of the contracts?" I nodded slowly, maintaining my cold, unnerving smile. "I am ready," I replied, picking up my laptop and closing the screen with a satisfying snap. "The timing is actually perfect." Diane looked back and forth between me and the silver-haired attorney, her mouth hanging slightly open in pure disbelief. She looked like she was trying to process a foreign language. "Dr. Cassidy," she repeated dumbly, as if she had never heard my name paired with my earned title before. "What is going on here? Who are these people, Cassidy? Answer me right now. Why are they calling you a doctor? Why are they in my house?" The attorney finally turned his attention to my mother. He looked at her with the mild, detached distaste of someone examining a very unpleasant insect. He unclasped his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He held the documents with absolute precision. He was about to deliver a harsh reality check so severe it would completely shatter her whole world forever. The silver-haired attorney did not flinch under my mother's furious glare. He stood perfectly straight, holding the stack of watermarked legal documents with practiced authority. "My name is Richard Harrington," he stated, his voice resonating with unshakable calm. "I am the senior executive counsel representing Pierce Health, a multi-billion-dollar global medical conglomerate based in Manhattan. We are here strictly on official corporate business regarding our newest executive acquisition. Diane blinked rapidly, her face twisting in profound confusion. The anger that fueled her moments ago was quickly dissolving into complete bewilderment. Pierce Health. She repeated the name of the massive corporation, clearly meaning nothing to her. Why on earth would the legal team for a medical conglomerate be standing in my living room? You have the wrong address. You need to leave before I call the authorities. Mr. Harrington ignored her threat entirely. He stepped forward and carefully placed his documents onto the mahogany coffee table, right next to the fraudulent loan papers my mother had desperately tried to force me to sign. He smoothed his silk tie and turned his full attention back to me. "We certainly have the correct address, Madam," Mr. Harrington said smoothly. "We are here specifically for Dr. Cassidy." As of 9 o'clock this morning, the board of directors at Pierce Health unanimously voted to formally acquire Dr. Cassidy's proprietary genomic sequencing algorithm. Furthermore, it is my distinct honor to officially welcome her to the corporate leadership team. He paused, letting his words hang heavily in the tense air of the living room before delivering the final crushing blow to my family's fabricated narrative. Effective immediately, Mr. Harrington continued, his voice projecting clearly. Dr. Cassidy is the newly appointed Senior Director of Risk Analysis and Data Integration for the entire Pierce Health Global Network. She is now one of the highest-ranking executives in our organization, overseeing a financial and data portfolio worth billions of dollars. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Diane's mouth opened and closed silently. She stared at me, then at the three men in expensive suits, and then back at me again. Her brain simply could not process the information. For my entire life, she had meticulously crafted a narrative where I was the pathetic daughter chasing a pointless degree, while Brittany was the brilliant visionary. Now, a team of high-powered Wall Street lawyers was standing in her house declaring that her scapegoat daughter was an elite corporate executive. "That is impossible," Brittany finally blurted out, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was shrill and panicked. "She is just a student. She does not know anything about business. She drives a 15-year-old Honda Civic. You are making a mistake. You have the wrong person." Mr. Harrington turned his sharp gaze toward my sister. "I can assure you, young lady, a $12 billion corporation does not make mistakes regarding executive appointments," he replied coldly. "Dr. Cassidy possesses one of the most brilliant analytical minds our engineering team has ever encountered. Her algorithmic technology is going to revolutionize our industry. Her compensation package reflects that immense value." Kendrick let out a low, ragged breath. Unlike Diane and Brittany, who were blinded by their own arrogance, Kendrick actually understood the corporate world. He understood the gravity of the title Senior Director of Risk Analysis at a conglomerate like Pierce Health. He knew exactly how much power, influence, and wealth came with that specific position. His eyes widened as he stared at me, his former smugness entirely replaced by a horrifying realization. He had spent the last hour aggressively mocking my intelligence and attempting to bully me into signing a fraudulent loan. Now he realized he had been aggressively insulting a woman who possessed more corporate power than he could ever dream of holding. "You," Kendrick whispered, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You knew this. You sat there and let us talk to you like that, knowing you had this position." I kept my posture perfectly relaxed, leaning back in the stiff accent chair. "I just received the final confirmation this morning," I replied, my tone dangerously even. "But yes, Kendrick, I sat here and listened carefully while you tried to explain synthetic hedges to me. I listened while my mother called my life a waste. I listened while my sister called me an ignorant brat. I wanted to see exactly how far all of you would go to destroy my future to save yourselves." Diane took a shaky step forward, her hands trembling violently. "Cassidy," she started, her voice stripped of all its former venom. "What is happening? What does this mean?" Mr. Harrington unclipped a gold pen from his inner suit pocket and laid it precisely on top of the fresh documents. "It means, madam, that your daughter is no longer subject to your financial manipulation," he stated firmly. "She is entirely untouchable." Mr. Harrington's words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Diane stared at him, her mind frantically trying to bridge the massive gap between the daughter she had always bullied and the corporate titan standing before her. I gestured for Mr. Harrington to proceed. He opened his thick leather folder and extracted the executive acquisition agreement. He slid the crisp document across the mahogany surface. It stopped next to Diane's trembling hand. "Take a close look, Diane," I said smoothly. Diane hesitated, then looked down. Brittany leaned over from the sofa, wiping her tear-streaked face to read over our mother's shoulder. The document was printed clearly, in bold black ink. There was the Pierce Health corporate seal, my full legal name, and right in the center of the page, the final acquisition buyout number. $7,200,000. I watched their eyes scan the zeros, their pupils dilated as the sheer magnitude of the wealth registered. $7.2 million, plus a $450,000 base salary. It was more money than Brittany's fake company could ever generate. The reaction was instantaneous and deeply sickening. The terror of federal prison and the crushing weight of their bankruptcy vanished from the room in seconds. The heavy, suffocating panic was instantly replaced by a wave of greedy, unadulterated relief. Diane let out a loud, breathless gasp. She looked up from the contract, her eyes wide and shining with a completely fabricated joy. And then she actually laughed. It was a bright, delighted sound that echoed horribly through the living room. "Oh my goodness," Diane cried out, pressing both hands against her chest. "Cassidy, this is incredible. $7 million. I cannot believe it. You kept this a secret from us. You wonderful, brilliant girl." She stepped toward me, her arms outstretched, as if she were about to pull me into a loving embrace. I held up a single hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. She did not even care about the harsh rejection. She was too intoxicated by the numbers resting on the table. "This changes everything," Diane continued, her voice practically singing. "Do you see this, Brittany? We are saved. The house is completely safe. Everything is perfectly fine." Brittany jumped up from the sofa, her previous hysteria entirely forgotten. A massive, relieved smile spread across her face. "Cassidy, I am so proud of you. I always knew you were smart. With this kind of capital, you can easily pay off that silly second mortgage Mom took out. You will not even notice it is gone. And you can just write a check to clear the warehouse debt for my brand. We can even rebrand the company together. It can be a family partnership." The audacity was so profound, it was almost artistic. Less than 20 minutes ago, Diane had confessed to committing federal identity theft against me. Brittany had called me an ignorant brat and demanded I take on $500,000 of toxic debt to save her fake aesthetic. Now confronted with my massive success, they experienced absolutely zero remorse. They felt no shame. They simply viewed my $7 million as a brand new bottomless resource for them to endlessly exploit. Diane clapped her hands together, already mentally spending my buyout money. "We can call the bank first thing Monday morning," she babbled excitedly. "You can wire the funds to clear Kendrick's credit cards too, just to get the slate clean. Then we need to celebrate. We should host a massive dinner at the club. I need to call the event coordinator right now. Everyone needs to know about my daughter's incredible new executive position." "Wait a minute," Kendrick said softly from the dark shadows in the corner of the room. Diane aggressively waved him off, completely lost in her delusion. "Do not worry, Kendrick. Cassidy has plenty of money now. We can afford to fix your little mistakes. This is what family does. We share our blessings." "Diane, shut up and look at the lawyers," Kendrick hissed, his voice tight with an impending sense of absolute doom. Unlike my mother and sister, who were completely blinded by the dollar signs, Kendrick had not moved an inch. He was staring directly at Mr. Harrington and the other two silent corporate attorneys. He noticed their extremely cold, terrifyingly impassive expressions. He knew that elite corporate legal teams did not drive out to the affluent suburbs on a weekend just to hand-deliver a massive paycheck and watch a toxic family hug. He truly understood the brutal reality of the corporate world. They were here to perform an execution. And he knew my mother was blindly walking right into the absolute center of the deadly trap we had set for her. Mr. Harrington did not raise his voice to cut through Diane's euphoric babbling. He simply cleared his throat, a sharp, authoritative sound that immediately commanded the room's attention. Diane stopped talking mid-sentence, her hands still clasped together in fake joy. She looked at the senior attorney, expecting him to offer his congratulations or perhaps detail the specifics of my stock options. Instead, Mr. Harrington looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. "Madam, I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding regarding the nature of our visit today," Mr. Harrington said smoothly. He picked up his gold pen and tapped it gently against the thick stack of legal documents. Pierce Health did not dispatch its senior legal team to celebrate. We are here to finalize an asset restructuring. Diane's smile faltered, but she stubbornly clung to her delusion. "Asset restructuring?" she repeated, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, you mean managing Cassidy's new wealth? Of course. She will need a wealth manager now. We can discuss all of that over dinner. I know some excellent people at the club who can help her invest. We do not require your referrals." Madam, Mr. Harrington cut in sharply, his tone dropping an octave. "Pierce Health is currently undergoing a massive corporate expansion. Specifically, our acquisitions division has been aggressively purchasing distressed debt portfolios across the eastern seaboard to consolidate our commercial real estate holdings." Kendrick flinched. He finally understood exactly where this was going. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He took another step back, hitting the wall with a soft thud. He tried to speak to stop the lawyer from finishing his sentence, but his throat was completely dry. Last Thursday, Mr. Harrington continued, his eyes locked onto Diane's increasingly confused face. Pierce Health finalized the complete buyout of a mid-size, aggressive venture capital firm based out of New York. The firm was severely overleveraged and facing immediate insolvency due to a series of highly toxic, unrecoverable commercial loans they had foolishly underwritten. Brittany frowned, clutching the sofa pillow tighter. "What does a venture capital firm have to do with my sister's algorithm?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Mr. Harrington turned his sharp gaze toward Brittany. "It has absolutely nothing to do with her algorithm, young lady, but it has everything to do with her new executive title. The venture capital firm we acquired was called V Capital." The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. V Capital. It was the exact predatory lending firm that held the massive second mortgage on my mother's house. It was the exact same firm that had extended the 45% interest merchant cash advance to Brittany's failing cosmetic company. And it was the exact same firm that Kendrick owed over $80,000 to in unsecured credit card debt. Diane stumbled backward, the back of her knees hitting the velvet sofa. She practically collapsed onto the cushions next to Brittany. Her hands flew to her mouth. "V Capital," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "No, that cannot be right. You are a medical company. Why would you buy a predatory lender?" "It is a strategic portfolio acquisition," Mr. Harrington replied coldly. "We acquire their distressed commercial real estate assets, liquidate their bad debts, and repurpose the capital. It is standard corporate procedure. However, the unique aspect of this specific acquisition is the executive we assign to oversee the liquidation process." Mr. Harrington slowly turned his body and gestured toward me with an open palm. As the newly appointed Senior Director of Risk Analysis, Mr. Harrington announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Dr. Cassidy has been given complete unilateral authority over the entire V Capital debt portfolio. She is the executive tasked with deciding which loans to restructure and which assets to immediately foreclose upon and seize." The silence that descended upon the room this time was entirely different. It was not the silence of shock or confusion. It was the crushing, suffocating silence of total annihilation. The intricate, toxic trap Diane had spent 3 years building had not just failed, it had completely reversed itself. She thought she was tying me to a sinking ship. She did not realize I had just been handed the controls to the nuclear submarine that was about to blow her ship completely out of the water. Diane stared at me, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost difficult to look at. The realization washed over her in a sickening wave. I was not just rich. I was not just successful. I was literally her creditor. Her. I owned the debt that she had fraudulently secured using my name. I owned the warehouse where Brittany's expired makeup sat rotting. I owned Kendrick's ruined credit score. I looked back at my mother, maintaining the same cold, unnerving smile. I leaned forward in the stiff accent chair, resting my elbows on my knees. I did not yell. I did not need to. "You wanted me to act like a real member of this family, Diane," I said softly. "You wanted me to be involved in the finances. Well, I am involved now. And as your newly appointed portfolio manager, I have some very bad news regarding your liquidity." I opened my laptop once again. The screen above the fireplace flickered back to life, but this time the interface was entirely different. It was the secure internal asset management portal for Pierce Health. The logo in the top corner was a stark reminder of the corporate behemoth now looming over their lives. I typed in my new executive credentials, the keystrokes echoing in the terrifyingly quiet room. "Let us start with the primary asset," I said, my voice completely devoid of any familial warmth. I clicked on a file labeled Residential Holdings Fairfield County. An image of my mother's sprawling brick colonial house appeared on the screen, accompanied by a mountain of red financial data. "Diane, the second mortgage you fraudulently took out using my social security number was immediately flagged during our acquisition audit. V Capital categorized it as a highly toxic asset because it is currently 90 days past due. The grace period has completely evaporated. As portfolio director, I hold unilateral authority to initiate foreclosure proceedings on this property today. I do not need a committee. I do not need a judge's preliminary approval. I simply have to click a single button on this dashboard, and the local sheriff will be here on Monday morning to place a padlock on your front door." Diane let out a weak, strangled sound, pressing her hand over her mouth. She looked around her beautifully decorated living room, her eyes lingering on the expensive silk curtains, finally realizing that she did not own any of it anymore. "But that is just the beginning." I continued, shifting my gaze to my sister. Brittany had shrunk completely into the corner of the velvet sofa, looking like a terrified child. I brought up the commercial portfolio. "Brittany, your organic cosmetics company took a massive merchant cash advance from V Capital. The terms of that specific loan allow the creditor to seize all physical inventory and commercial leases the moment the account goes into default. You are currently in default on 3 consecutive payments. I own your warehouse lease. I own your branding rights. I own every bottle of expired lotion in your storage facility. I am legally authorized to liquidate your entire company to recoup the corporate losses." Brittany began to hyperventilate, clutching her chest as tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face. "You cannot do this, Cassidy," she pleaded, her voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "It is my life's work. You cannot just take it away from me. We are sisters. We stopped being sisters the moment you laughed while our mother called my life a waste," I replied coldly, feeling absolutely no sympathy for her manufactured tears. "You built your life's work on stolen money. Now the actual owner of that money is reclaiming it." Finally, I turned my attention to Kendrick. He stood frozen against the wall, sweating profusely in his expensive suit. "And then there is you, Kendrick," I said, bringing up his consolidated debt file. "You used V Capital's subprime lending division to finance your lifestyle after you were fired from your venture capital firm. You leveraged your luxury vehicles and your fraudulent investment portfolio to secure short-term high-yield credit. Since those accounts are cross-collateralized with Brittany's failing business, your debts are now completely under my direct jurisdiction. I own the title to your matte black Mercedes. I own your outstanding credit lines. I am legally your primary creditor." Kendrick closed his eyes, his head dropping forward in absolute defeat. The Wall Street persona was shattered. He was just a broke, unemployed man who had picked a fight with the absolute worst possible opponent. Diane fell from the sofa, dropping directly onto her knees on the Persian rug. She crawled a few inches toward me, her face smeared with mascara and tears. "Cassidy, please," she begged, her voice scraping the bottom of her throat. "I am your mother. I gave you life. You cannot throw me out on the street. You have $7 million. You can just pay off the portfolio. You can erase the debt. You can save us." I looked down at her groveling figure. "You are completely missing the most important legal variable in this equation, Diane," I stated, my voice sharp as a razor. "You committed federal identity theft. You forged my signature to secure that mortgage." "Mr. Harrington," I said, looking up at the senior attorney standing stoically beside me, "what happens when an executive reports a fraudulent mortgage application within our portfolio?" Mr. Harrington adjusted his suit jacket, looking down at my mother with absolute disdain. "The corporation is legally obligated to report the fraud," he explained smoothly. "We invalidate the fraudulent debt immediately, and we press federal wire fraud charges against you." I smiled back down. The absolute finality of Mr. Harrington's words completely shattered whatever fragile remnants of my mother's ego still existed. The proud, arrogant suburban matriarch who had spent my entire life dictating my worth was completely gone. In her place was a desperate, terrified woman who suddenly realized she was entirely out of moves. Diane dragged herself closer, her hands grasping desperately at the hem of my cheap blazer. "Cassidy, please," she sobbed, forcing large theatrical tears to spill down her cheeks. "You cannot let them send me to prison. I am your mother. I did all of this for you. I always knew you were the special one. I always knew you were the smartest person in this family." I looked at her, my expression completely unchanged. "You always knew I was the smartest," I repeated flatly. Diane nodded frantically, her perfect hair now a disheveled mess. "Yes, of course I did. I pushed you so hard because I knew you had limitless potential. I only focused on Brittany because she is so weak. She needed my help just to survive. She is practically helpless compared to you. You were my strong, brilliant girl. I always loved you best." Brittany gasped loudly from the sofa. The golden child who had spent her entire life basking in the warmth of our mother's unconditional favoritism looked absolutely devastated. "Mom," she whimpered, her voice cracking with profound betrayal. "How can you say that? I am sitting right here." Diane did not even glance over her shoulder at her precious youngest daughter. She kept her tear-streaked face turned up toward me, completely willing to throw Brittany under a moving bus if it meant saving herself from a federal indictment. "You are an incredible actress, Diane," I said carefully, prying her trembling fingers off my jacket. "But your tears are completely useless here. You did not push me to succeed. You starved me of affection and resources, and you actively mocked my education less than 24 hours ago. You do not love me best. You just love my money." As Diane collapsed fully onto the floor in a fit of hysterical, entirely fabricated sobbing, a new voice cut through the noise. It was Kendrick. He stepped away from the wall, smoothing the lapels of his navy suit. He cleared his throat, adopting a completely different posture. The aggressive, patronizing finance guru had vanished. Now he was putting on the polished charm of a corporate sycophant. "Cassidy, listen." Kendrick began, offering me a smooth, deeply insincere smile. "Let us look at this logically. You just stepped into a massive executive role. Senior Director of Risk Analysis at a $12 billion conglomerate is a huge undertaking. You are going to need people you can actually trust in your corner. People who understand the complex mechanics of high-level finance and corporate mergers. I know the corporate landscape inside and out." I stared at him, genuinely stunned by his sheer audacity. "Are you actually trying to network with me right now?" I asked. "I am offering my strategic services," Kendrick replied smoothly, taking a confident step forward, as if he were in a boardroom pitching a startup. "I know I had a minor setback in Atlanta, but my fundamental knowledge of venture capital is incredibly sharp. I can help you navigate the internal politics at Pierce Health. I could be your vice president of operations. We could build an absolute empire together. Just clear my debt portfolio with V Capital as a sign-on bonus, and I am entirely yours. I promise I will be your most loyal asset." The absolute, unadulterated hypocrisy of the moment was almost blinding. My mother was sobbing on the floor, pretending she had always cherished me. My brother-in-law, who had just mocked my future barista salary, was now shamelessly begging me for a corporate executive job. My sister was weeping on the sofa, realizing she was completely abandoned by the two people she trusted most. They had stripped away every layer of their fake suburban perfection, revealing the greedy, parasitic nature underneath. They had zero loyalty to each other. The moment the financial ship started sinking, they immediately began drowning each other just to reach my lifeboat. Kendrick stood there waiting for my answer, adjusting his expensive watch, genuinely believing his smooth talking could erase his previous insults. Diane whimpered at my feet, acting like a victim of a cruel misunderstanding. It was a pathetic display of narcissistic collapse. They were completely hollow people, entirely driven by money and status, and watching them instantly turn on each other was the most satisfying validation I could have ever asked for. The illusion was permanently broken, leaving nothing but ugly truths. I looked down at the three of them, a tangled mess of greed on the Persian rug, and felt a profound wave of physical disgust. I took a deliberate step backward, putting distance between my expensive leather shoes and my mother's grasping hands. The sheer pathetic nature of their collapse was almost suffocating. They were willing to sacrifice each other in a heartbeat just to salvage a fraction of their fabricated wealth. I shook my head slowly, completely repulsed by the people I had spent my entire life trying to please. "You are all completely hollow," I stated quietly, my voice carrying a heavy, absolute finality. "There is nothing real inside you. Just an endless hunger for status and money you never actually earned. I am done listening to your lies. I am done playing your twisted family games. Mr. Harrington, please present them with their options so I can finally leave this house." The senior attorney stepped forward, his polished shoes stepping smoothly over spilled red wine. He unclasped a secondary compartment in his leather briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of legal documents. These papers were not printed on standard corporate letterhead. They were heavy binding settlement agreements drafted specifically for immediate asset forfeiture. He placed the thick packet onto the mahogany coffee table right in front of Diane's tear-stained face. "Madam, the corporate directive from Pierce Health is remarkably straightforward," Mr. Harrington began, his voice devoid of human empathy. "Dr. Cassidy has generously authorized a single non-negotiable settlement offer to resolve the massive toxic debt portfolio your family has accumulated over the last few years. You have exactly two choices today, and neither of them involves walking away with your current lifestyle intact." He tapped the top document with his gold pen. "Option 1 is a complete and total surrender of all physical and liquid assets tied to the V Capital loans. If you choose this path, you will sign over the deed to this Fairfield County property directly to the Pierce Health Holding Company today. You will vacate the premises within exactly 14 days. Furthermore, Brittany will sign over 100% ownership, including all intellectual property trademarks and physical inventory of her cosmetics brand. Kendrick will voluntarily surrender the keys and titles to his leased vehicles and forfeit any remaining balances in his frozen investment accounts." Diane gasped loudly, staring at the settlement papers as if they were covered in venom. "You are asking us to give you absolutely everything," she whispered, her voice trembling with sheer horror. "You want to leave us homeless and bankrupt on the street? We are asking you to pay your legally binding debts using the only assets you currently possess," Mr. Harrington corrected her sharply. "If you sign these documents today, Pierce Health will write off the negative balances. You will be left with nothing, but you will walk away completely free of debt. More importantly, Dr. Cassidy will formally decline to press criminal charges regarding the fraudulent second mortgage you took out in her name." Mr. Harrington paused, letting the heavy weight of the settlement sink into their minds before delivering the terrifying alternative. He leaned forward slightly, his silver hair catching the bright light from the crystal chandelier above. "Option 2 is remarkably simple. If you refuse to sign the asset forfeiture agreement right now, I will immediately contact the federal authorities. We will hand over the undeniable proof that you, Diane, committed aggravated identity theft and wire fraud across state lines. Because the fraudulent loan amount exceeds $500,000, you will be facing a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. The word penitentiary hung in the air like a falling guillotine blade. Diane stopped breathing entirely. Her eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated terror. The wealthy country club socialite suddenly pictured herself in a sterile prison cell stripped of her designer clothes and precious suburban status. And because the accounts are cross-collateralized, Mr. Harrington added, turning his sharp gaze toward Kendrick and Brittany, Pierce Health will aggressively pursue both of you for criminal conspiracy and financial fraud. We will ensure the federal prosecutors thoroughly investigate every single illegal transfer you made to fund that fraudulent cosmetics company. You will all face significant prison time alongside your mother. The ultimatum was officially set. The trap was permanently locked from the outside. There was absolutely no room for negotiation, no space for emotional manipulation, and no amount of fake tears that could alter the outcome. They were entirely trapped in a prison of their own making. Sign the papers and lose your fake empire, I said softly, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes, or refuse and spend the next decade in a federal prison cell. You have 5 minutes left. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway filled the agonizing, suffocating silence of the living room. 5 minutes. It was the shortest deadline they had ever faced in their entire lives, and it carried the crushing weight of their entire existence. I stood perfectly still, watching the reality of their complete destruction wash over them. Kendrick did not even wait for a full minute to pass. His instinct for pure, selfish survival completely overrode his marital loyalty and his fake bravado. He lunged forward, grabbed the gold pen from the mahogany table, and aggressively flipped to the signature pages of his specific forfeiture agreements. He signed his name with frantic, jerky movements, legally surrendering his leased luxury cars, his frozen investment accounts, and whatever remaining dignity he still possessed. He tossed the pen violently back onto the table and stepped away, retreating to the far wall. He refused to make eye contact with his wife, completely abandoning her to save his own skin. Brittany let out a pathetic, high-pitched wail as she realized she was entirely on her own. Her husband had folded instantly. Her mother was paralyzed by shock. Trembling violently, Brittany slid off the edge of the velvet sofa and practically crawled toward the coffee table. She picked up the heavy gold pen, her tears splashing directly onto the crisp, watermarked paper. With a shaking hand, she signed away the cosmetics company she had built out of pure vanity and stolen funds. She signed away her warehouse lease, her remaining inventory, and the fake chief executive title she had so proudly paraded across the internet. Only Diane remained. She stared at the final set of documents, the papers that would officially transfer the deed of her massive Connecticut mansion to a faceless corporate holding company. The physical manifestation of her lifelong obsession with status was sitting right in front of her, demanding to be completely surrendered. She looked up at me one last time. She was not looking for mercy anymore. She was desperately searching for a crack in my armor, a tiny hint of the anxious, obedient daughter she used to manipulate with ease. I gave her absolutely nothing. My face remained an impenetrable fortress of cold detachment. I checked my plain wristwatch, the gesture sharp and deliberate. 3 minutes left, Diane, I stated flatly. The federal prosecutor's office closes in exactly 1 hour. A visceral shudder racked Diane's body. The terrifying threat of a federal prison sentence finally eclipsed her desperate vanity. She let out a hollow, agonizing moan, a sound completely stripped of all her previous theatricality. It was the genuine, ugly sound of a narcissist watching their entire world burn to the ground. She reached out with a trembling hand, picked up the pen and slowly dragged it across the signature line. The dark ink stained the page permanently and legally binding her to absolute financial ruin. She dropped the pen as if the gold metal had physically burned her skin and collapsed into a sobbing heap on the expensive Persian rug. Mr. Harrington stepped forward immediately. He did not offer them a single word of comfort. He efficiently gathered the signed contracts, tapped the edges against the table to align them perfectly, and slid them safely back into his secure leather briefcase. The corporate execution was complete. The multi-million-dollar estate, the luxury vehicles, and the fraudulent businesses now officially belonged to Pierce Health. I reached down and picked up my heavy canvas tote bag. I slid my sleek silver laptop inside and zipped it shut with a loud, final sound. I did not say goodbye. I did not offer a final, gloating monologue about karma or justice. They were already drowning in their own self-made misery, and they were no longer worth another second of my time. I turned my back on the pathetic wreckage of my family and walked toward the hallway. My cheap boots clicked against the Italian marble floor, echoing the steady rhythm of a woman who had finally broken her chains. Behind me, the sound of their collective sobbing blended into a pathetic, miserable chorus of defeat. I did not pause. I did not hesitate. I reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door, and pulled it open. The warm afternoon air hit my face, carrying the sweet scent of blooming hydrangeas. I walked down the sweeping brick steps, bypassing my faded silver Honda Civic entirely. Waiting perfectly idling at the end of the circular driveway was a sleek black corporate town car with tinted windows. The uniformed driver saw me approaching and immediately stepped out, opening the rear passenger door with a highly respectful nod. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, surrounded by the quiet hum of the powerful engine. The driver closed the door, sealing me safely inside a world of absolute security. Through the tinted glass, I looked back at the sprawling mansion one last time. The house that had always felt like a suffocating prison now simply looked like an empty shell. I pulled out my phone, typed a quick message to Jonathan Pierce, confirming the portfolio acquisition was successfully completed, and leaned back into the plush leather seat. The town car pulled smoothly out of the driveway, carrying me far away from the ghosts of my past and driving me straight toward my empire. As the town car pulled smoothly out of the driveway, carrying me far away from the ghosts of my past and driving me straight toward my empire, a profound, overwhelming silence washed over me. It was not the tense, suffocating quiet of my mother's living room, waiting for the next emotional blow to land. This was the pure, unadulterated silence of absolute freedom. I watched the manicured lawns and towering oak trees of Fairfield County blur past the tinted window. With every passing mile marker, the heavy, invisible chains that had bound me to their toxic expectations snapped one by one. The air inside the car felt lighter, and my chest finally stopped aching. I reached into my canvas tote bag, pulled out my phone, and opened my contacts list. With a few swift, deliberate taps, I permanently blocked Diane, Brittany, and Kendrick. I erased their phone numbers, filtered their email addresses directly into the trash folder, and severed the final digital threads connecting us to each other. The act was incredibly simple, yet it carried the weight of a monumental victory. Going strictly no contact was not an act of cruelty or petty revenge, it was the ultimate act of self-preservation. For 33 years I had been force-fed the dangerous lie that blood inherently dictates loyalty. Society constantly tells us that we must forgive our families, that we must endure their relentless abuse, simply because we share the same genetics. But sitting in the back of that luxurious car, armed with the ultimate validation of my hard work, I realized exactly how toxic that societal lie truly is. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to exploit your kindness, steal your hard-earned resources, or secretly sabotage your future. If a complete stranger had stolen my identity to take out a fraudulent federal mortgage, I would have sent them to prison without a second thought. The fact that the thief shared my last name did not make the crime any less devastating. It made the betrayal infinitely worse. Cutting them off entirely was the only logical equation left to solve. I was not just removing bad investments from my corporate financial portfolio today. I was aggressively liquidating the toxic assets in my personal life. I felt no grief. I had already mourned the mother and sister I never truly had years ago. The future stretching out before me was now entirely mine to build from the ground up. I did not need Diane's conditional manipulative approval anymore. I did not need to compete with Brittany's fake, desperately curated internet aesthetic. I did not need to shrink my intellect to make deeply insecure people like Kendrick feel tall. I was stepping into a world where my sharp mind, my discipline, and my resilience were the only currencies that mattered. And more importantly, I was stepping into a world where I could finally choose my own family. Real family is not a biological accident you are forced to endure. Real family consists of the people who celebrate your victories without a single trace of hidden jealousy. They are the mentors who challenge you to grow, the friends who stand by you when you have absolutely nothing material to offer them, and the colleagues who respect your boundaries. I was finally ready to surround myself with genuine people who operated in reality, not illusions. By the time the iconic Manhattan skyline came into view, rising like a jagged, glittering crown of glass and steel against the late afternoon sun, the past was already fading into complete irrelevance. I thought briefly about my faded silver Honda Civic sitting in my mother's soon-to-be foreclosed driveway. I smiled, deciding to just leave it there to be repossessed along with her house. It belonged to the old Cassidy, the broke graduate student who survived on instant ramen and apologized for simply existing. The new Cassidy did not need it. Monday morning, I would walk through the towering glass doors of Pierce Health headquarters, take the private elevator to the executive floor, and step into an office that I had earned with my own brilliant mind. I had completely flipped the board. The game was over and I had won everything. My story is a brutal reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones sitting across from you at your own dinner table. They will use your guilt, your love, and your sense of obligation to build their own empires while actively tearing yours down to the studs. You have to be smart enough to see the trap and ruthless enough to walk away when the ugly truth is finally revealed. Never let anyone convince you that your boundaries are selfish. Protect your peace, protect your assets, and never be afraid to burn a toxic bridge to light your way forward.